Spiker'i. Oturumumuzu gerçekleştirmek üzere moderatörümüz, Türkiye Cumhuriyeti Enerji ve Tabii Kaynaklar Bakan Yardımcımız Sayın Abdullah Tancan Beyefendi. Önce kendilerini sahneye almak istiyorum. Buyurunuz lütfen.
Deputy Minister for Energy and Natural Resources.
Ben panelistlerimizi davet edeceğim.
I would like to
Borusan
invite the panelists.
ENBV Enerji Genel Müdürü Sayın Enis
General
Amasyalı.
Manager of Borusan ENBW Energy, Enis Amasyalı.
Polat Enerji Genel Müdürü Sayın Arkın
General Manager
Akbay.
of Polat Energy, Mr. Arkın Akbay.
Güriş Holding Enerji Grup CEO'su
Güriş
Sayın
Holding
Ali Karaduman.
CEO for Energy Group, Mr. Ali Karaduman.
Demirer Holding Yönetim Kurulu Başkanı Sayın Erol
Head of the
Demirer.
Executive Board for Demirer
Ve ben
Holding, Mr.
sözü
Erol
Sayın
Demirer.
Bakanımıza bırakıyorum. Buyurunuz
And I
lütfen.
would like to give Deputy Minister now.
Sektörümüzün ve kamunun çok değerli
Distinguished
temsilcileri,
representatives of the sector,
hanımefendiler, beyefendiler,
ladies and gentlemen,
öncelikle hepinizi
firstly I would
gerek
like
şahsım
to
adına
welcome
gerek
you all on
bakanlığımız
my
adına
behalf and on behalf
selamlıyorum.
of
Hoş geldiniz diyorum.
my ministry.
TÜREP
Welcome.
yönetimini de böyle bir
And I also would like to
organizasyonu
thank the Turkish Wind
tertip
Energy
ederek hepimizi
Association
tekrar
for
bir araya
organizing
getirip
this important event.
gerek sorunlarımızı tartışmak, müzakere etmek,
This is an important platform to
bulmaya
discuss our
çalışmakla ilgili
problems and to
bu
try and find
organizasyonu
solutions to
yaptıkları
our
için
issues.
tebrik ediyorum.
And it's really a very good opportunity
Bir
to be
tebriği
with
de
you
sektörümüzün
today.
tamamına
And
yapıyorum.
one
Çünkü
note for the
zaman zaman
sectoral
gerek
representatives,
firma olarak,
we know
gerek
that from time
TÜREP
to
çatısı
time,
altında
both under the framework
yatırımcılarımızla
and umbrella of
sorunlarıyla bir
the
araya
TWEA,
gelerek
and
sorunları
of
konuşuyoruz.
course amongst ourselves we
Birçok
come
zorluklara
together
rağmen,
and
karşılaştıkları
discuss
birçok
about the
sıkıntılara
challenges.
rağmen
Albeit many
yatırım yaparak
challenges, we know that the industry has been investing in this sector, believing in it, and reaching out to the 10,000 megawatts is really a very important success. But it shouldn't be the end of the story. In the period to follow, I think we should be more eager to invest even more into this industry. So for that, we need to discuss what is ahead of us as the representatives of the sector and the representatives of the leading companies in this industry are with us today, and I would like to welcome them as well. At the same time, both the audience in the hall and our digital audience, I think, would have a lot to ask, probably to the panelists and to the ministry. Our panelists have been very useful to discuss these problems, and I'm just going to take questions at the end of the session and complete the session. But before the speakers, I would like to introduce the speakers one by one.
yeni duyacağınız bazı hususları, bazı rakamsal büyüklükleri de
Well, especially I also would mention about a couple of figures. Maybe those are going to be the figures that you'll be hearing for the first time. As you all know, one of the topics of the agenda that we have is that the installed capacity that we have reached so far, already discussed by Mr. President, Minister in their opening addresses, and of course the stakeholders of the industry know it pretty well. With regards to hybrid numbers, I would like to give. Again, of course, the TWEA is also closely following it because I know they always tell us the exact figures. Almost 1,500 megawatt of hybrid capacity allocated for the power plants, wind power plants. As you all know, as for hybrid solar capacity allocation, for wind, there is no capacity restriction. The investor, depending on his or her feasibility assessment, the capacity of the hybrid power plant that they identify, and we can do the allocation. So 1,500 megawatts allocated so far. Likewise, 558 megawatts of an allocation, it is still ongoing. This is the data that I get from the Energy Market Regulatory Authority. Now, except for those in operation, as for the projects under construction, 4,383 megawatts of it, and 2,062 megawatts is about to be commissioned, and the rest already commissioned. 2,105 megawatts of a pre-license. I mean, this is the licensing period before the start of the construction. So that is the capacity that is in pre-license. Now, as you all know, the capacity increases, I'm sure you follow, but at the beginning of December, we have actually responded to 1,047 megawatts of a capacity increase. And it was 1,030 megawatts of a capacity increase already given, expected to be turned into investment. In total, it makes 2,072 megawatts of a capacity increase. As much as I know, very few of this is commissioned so far and operational. Now, in the opening addresses, maybe it is for the first time that representatives of the industry heard for the first time. There is a draft law that is being debated in the parliamentary commission, which will be tomorrow, this debate. The content of the regulation is that, as you all know, for the time being, as for the capacity increases, especially there was a law enacted in the recent year, they cannot make use of YEKDEM. They cannot exercise rights out of YEKDEM. And as they cannot exercise YEKDEM, there is the local contribution pay in the new regulation, but they also cannot exercise this. But now, as for the capacity increases to be in effect after a certain date, they also, I mean, it's not 5 years after the operating time of the main building, but starting as of the enforcement of the capacity increase, they will make use of this local pricing. And hopefully, this is going to pass the parliament by the end of the year. And this is just one reminder I would like to mention. So this is just a brief introduction. And as I told you, following the panel, we can get questions from the audience here in the hall physically, and at the same time from the online participants, because I would like to reserve some time for that interaction. So I just wanted to be brief from that perspective, and I would like to give the floor to the panelists. Now, the first floor will be given to Borusan, ENBW Energy, Enis Amasyalı. Welcome, welcome. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to start by expressing my regards to all the participants. This is really an important event, and therefore I'd like to thank the Turkish Wind Energy Association for their efforts in organizing this event. Before coming to the next 10 years, we need, of course, to discuss about the experiences and about the mistakes of the past. So to start off, I think I would like to start by talking about our experiences and the point that we are standing right now in terms of our gains. Today, we have been going through a new global energy system. A new economy is emerging, and more we've been speaking about climate change, Green Deal, green transformation, carbon regulation at limit. I think these have been implications over our daily routine as well. Within that transformation, there are two energy-related topics which can be named as the wind and the solar, which were crawling like 15 years ago. Now, in terms of the costs they are coming with the competencies, with their scale and technology, I think they have been the two leading powers in this transformation, and they constitute the cheapest electricity energy source in the world. More to concentrate more on our own story, I'm just thinking about 2008 roughly, which was the date of start of activity of our company, and our installed capacity was 360 megawatts, and now we have reached 10,580 megawatts, which means a long distance. Early this month, the International Energy Agency disclosed its renewable energy report. That's the global report for 2021. If you would check the data on Turkey, on top of the 10,580 megawatts of installed capacity, the agency predicts 53 gigawatts capacity that would be increased by 50%, which means that a plus 26 gigawatt would be added on a global scale. Out of this 26 gigawatt, 30% would be wind. To make a rough calculation, of course, there are some scenarios, but 6 to 8 gigawatts equivalent of an extra wind power is expected by the end of 2026. For 2030, in our national contribution statement, 16 gigawatts was stipulated. So if we can provide all these conditions, probably the target will have been reached 4 years ago. I have to say that we're quite humble about the figures because the capacity can easily go beyond these figures. And hence, as for the requirements of this green transformation and 2053 roadmap, it is obvious that we need to increase these figures quite a lot. 48 gigawatts is something that we've been talking about. So it requires 7 meters per second of an average wind speed, which is not applicable anymore. I mean, it's lost its validity. Actually, the offshore wind capacity is 75 gigawatts. And coming to, of course, to the offshore, we also need to consider the onshore capacity. So obviously, we are speaking about a potential beyond 100 gigawatts, and 10.5 or 11 gigawatts have yet been achieved. Although this journey of achieving or fulfilling the capacity seems a big target, actually it involves a lot of learnings. Actually, just turning back and just talking about this market, the first thing was about the legislation. Back in 2009 and 10, you would remember that we used to discuss a lot about the mining permits, which was a problem in itself. And then the technical interaction analysis came in as another issue. And the forest consents or the permits, which is still ongoing. Issues about agriculture, they all came along. or there were times in which there were some discordance between the central organizations and the provincial administrations of some institutions. So as the stakeholders of the sector under the leadership of the ministry, we've overcome many of them. As we've overcome many of them, of course, new problems emerged, and most didn't have a prescription at hand, although there were national practices.
Tariflemek gerekiyordu. Bir şeyi de söylemek isterim.
So there is one thing I would like to underline, in particular, of course, we know pretty well the European market because of our, again, foreign partner. Of course, as the investors, as the stakeholders, for the most of the time, we have some complaints and so, but trust me, it's much more burdensome and challenging, also the procedures in Europe. But the difference is that the period is defined, but also defined for us. And of course, from A to Z, we have an ecosystem right now, from production to transport to installation, assembly, commissioning, project management, maintenance and operation, and so. And we can speak about quite actually a wide and very well educated and qualified workforce. And this is such a workforce that is serving not only in the country locally, but also to the international markets. And renewable energy is closely correlated with environment. And as we all know, also recently in the field of environment and social issues, as you all know, we experienced a lot. As you all know, our motto is good neighborhood. And the geographies and the regions that we go, on the basis of good neighborhood relations, we built our relations. I mean, of course, even saying neighborhood, it is not only the social environment, but also flora and fauna that you touch with. And I'm sure that this experience that we gather will, in the near future, will make us very much prepared. What do I mean by this? The new financing conditions. At the basis of the new financing conditions, we all have environment and governance and so on. If actually this experience, you're saying that those who are giving you credits, loans are looking, taking into account all these relations and associations. There is even rating for this. For example, your relations with the environment, with the social structures around. And how do they measure? How do they measure it? Well, there are different rating systems. Different certification standards, rating standards. These are generally accepted rules, and if you reach a certain score there, of course, you actually have better access to credit facilities and under better conditions, also under better pricing. Because if you're not good enough, you cannot have any access to such credit facilities at all. And of course, this is the entire experience that we have. What I would like to mention is that maybe this is the most important thing, which will be linked to the future. Retrospectively, 10,500 megawatts. I think majority of those are from 2007 on US dollar basis and without auction. Around 65% of an allocation, if I'm not mistaken. And another majority of that in 2011 auctions. Like the previously effective YEKDEM, they were operational. Then in 2017, this time, we have an experience with a new auction. And then we had another project with the solar. And then 2017 and after, this time YEKA experiences that we had. Now, as for the future, I think the main fuel driving growth is, of course, the incentive policies and so on, and favorable macroeconomic conditions. But it is either YEKA or capacity allocation auctions. Although we have a project stock from the past, when we consider the growth of the country, 2053 target goals of the country, these numbers that we are speaking about, 1,000 megawatts, these are innocent, tiny figures, I would say. What I'm trying to say is that In the shortest extent possible, we have to enlarge our project inventory. Now, in the new economic model that I'm speaking about, if we would like to keep our competitive edge, then we have to do the transformation as soon as possible. Of course, to do so, there is the need for the allocation of the capacity, and at the same time, the procedures for the auctions. And I also wish to share some other things with you, but I would like to give a pause in here, and I will leave it to the second part. Thank you.
Bir tur daha yapacağız. Yani bir ikinci kısım olacak.
We'll have another round after the first tour of our panelists. So, I mean, however you like, not necessarily. If you like, you can use your all time in the first round or spare some time to the second round as well. Now I will be turning to Polat Energy. Mr. Akbay, I'm asking you this time, by the way, welcome again. We're hearing what you have to say. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Minister, and my regards to the panel. I would like to thank the association for this event. Hopefully, many other gigawatts will be celebrated in a shorter span of time than a decade, and altogether, hopefully, we will be celebrating. If I may, I would like to speak through my items from the point my predecessor stopped, and I will start a bit globally. You all know that we are about to face a severe problem, and we have been already experiencing the impacts, the climate change. As the producers of wind energy, we have quite simple suggestions for a solution. I think we need to be involved primarily in the global energy transformation. And according to the figures, towards 2030, almost 35 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions are to be tackled with. If we want to stop climate change, these levels must be down to 1/3. As the wind energy generation companies, we can put a significant contribution to that. 6.3 gigatons can be saved, which means that we need to increase our capacities individually. Again, globally speaking, installed capacities as of 2020, particularly on the onshore, is 687 gigawatts, and offshore we're speaking about 32 gigawatts of a production level. By 2050, this may correspond to 35%, corresponding to almost 6,000 gigawatts. So wind is not the only source, but it stands and will stand as the most important one. And there is also the employment aspect to the equation. As we get out of this fossil fuel world, one of the most important concerns in the energy sector was the impacts or the expected impacts on employment. But direct employment is expected to reach 6 million by 2050. So with these capacities increasing, we'll have a significant contribution to welfare of our societies as well. Well, where do we stand as Turkey? We've taken an important step, and we were already a party to the Paris Climate Convention, and now after the ratification, we have our own responsibilities. Let's take a brief look at the European Green Deal within the framework of the Paris Convention. Actually, the most important factor sector is zero pollution. This is something that we all are providing a contribution to within the circular economy. Sustainable transportation, e-mobility, and how this can be met by renewable energy. Also, for the funding of the transformation, some innovative solutions must be found immediately bound by the stakeholders. As for our own installed capacity, we started off from 300 megawatts, and as of the end of 14,459 megawatts, we are standing. So every year we need to add minimum 1,000 megawatts, and this is the target that we need to face fit. As for installed capacity, we correspond to 10.5% of the system, and the global target is 35%. Our share in energy generation is around 9%. But why would wind be prioritized? Because it has the most cost-effective level of funding. As for leveraged costs, marginally, we are to speak about a very clear contribution in each tier. In other words, versus other alternative energy generations, wind has the most favorable cost for electricity generation according to predictions for 2025. Together with storage, this may also be positioned to correspond to base load. Actually, so as to optimize the grid investments, I think we need the proper management of imbalances. Actually, in terms of the economic improvements, I think this is going to get a lot better every other day as we're approaching the targets. We have a hidden potential, but how can we put them into real life? Actually, on the technology side, every investment will come back to us and to our country as a value. So the initial thing that needs to be done is to use some control algorithms to support our plans with wisdom and to get more value from the existing plants. Actually, in the production planning, we need to consider our own actually availability structures, time-based and as well as structure-based, because they will have an impact on the grid in terms of the energy quality. It's an important added value. Voltage regulations, I think this is quite important. Reactive power management and ideality management. I think these would be the fields of concern and consideration. And the first glance, I think we can create extra value out of our existing position, and all of our future investments will have these impacts directly reflecting on the consumer. I think we need to predict the future, because we always have to consider the fact that the support mechanisms will be only limited. So many of our investors will need to go beyond these support mechanisms after a while. Therefore, we need to look into big data more carefully, and we need to look into our capacity utilization ratios, and it should be a target to increase such ratios. Field modeling is extremely important for a better capacity utilization. Here, I'm sure that if we do so, we'll see the benefits. Another aspect that we need to be more available is the control algorithms. Many of the tests are based on such algorithms for the moment, and once we do it, we'll get more value out of the existing capacity. Another point that we need to concentrate on is to optimize our maintenance costs as the sector. Here, turbulence management is extremely important because the structures that will have an implication over the aging of the equipment will need to be meticulously managed. And I think we need to take due steps as to how we can improve these processes. Plus, preventive and performance and capacity increasing maintenance management, digital kits, drone utilization for maintenance work, and also increasing the level of automation to support the control algorithms, also to enhance preventive maintenance, I think is another priority. I would spare the rest of my presentation to the next round so that we'll have some words to discuss in the second round.
Now we'll move to Gürüş. Ali Karaduman will be taking the floor. And welcome, by the way. So the floor is yours for the first round. Thank you very much. I feel like everyone is very much exhausted. I've prepared actually a slide. If you allow me, I would like to go through that slide just to keep the crowd more dynamic.
Sayın katılımcılar, sayın
distinguished participants, distinguished Turkish Wind Energy Conference family. Thank you very much for organizing this event. And together in the previous meeting, at the same time, actually, Mr. Tancan was the moderator. He listened to us very carefully, took down notes of everything, and he told everything that we mentioned during that panel. Therefore, I still feel that as he's the moderator this year, he actually will be helpful. Now, I would like to express my gratitude to all the audience here in the hall and at the same time who are registered online. For the last 64 years, as published by this Karaduman, we've been at Gürüş Holdings that is accountable for what it's been doing since then. And as the representative of Gürüş, I will speak about what our wind power potential was and what we're going to do in the future. Now, first of all, there's quite a positive energy out of this panel, and I'm sure that it will contribute a lot to our new power plant investments and how we can actually provide a better and a new future, because we are here actually to serve the industry, to serve our, at the same time, government. And I should say that we should not be here to discuss about what we have done so far, but also to be grateful, because without YEKDEM mechanism, we would never have the investments that we have. And our state is behind us and helped us and supported us for the investment. And I'm sure that we expect and we also wish to get more positive support from our government so as to continue with the investment. It is very important to use the renewable energy resources. It's actually a big opportunity for Turkey. Of course, as you all know, it's very important for competent companies to conduct the investments. I would like to underline competent. Why? Because I myself, for example, visited all the power plants that we have, for example, in geothermal and in the wind power plants in particular. Because if you're not a competent investor, then you'll be wasting an actual resources. And especially if you make some wrong investments at the same time, it is wrong because it is our responsibility to minimize these types of practices. That's the reason why we have to be together in these types of conferences. And because it's also my main responsibility to make sure that you also draw from my mistakes, because we're a family of energy. And that's the reason why it's really very important to be together in these types of events and to decide together. And
Erol abimizin yanında burada.
I'm also more than happy at the same time to be next to Mr. Demirer. Why? Because he actually is the person who built the first wind power plant. And therefore, whenever we say Turkish WPP, I really feel so happy to be sitting next to Mr. Demirer, and I wish for good health to him. Well, of course, I just wanted to show our enthusiasm through the photos. As my colleagues already stated, I don't want to bore you with some technical or administrative detail. And I'm not here so as to promote my company as well, because both Demirer, Polat, Borusan, we're all having a great competition head to head. And I am always making an analogy. I was a professional swimmer when I was young, for example. We were outside the pool, we were all friends. But once we were in the same pool during the race, we were competitors. The reason why I'm showing you this is that Mr. Demirer, the very first one, started, but as we were all, we also did something, and 700 megawatts, quite a nice wind potential that we have reached so far. Idris, our founder, always said, what is important is what you have completed. What you have to focus on is what you are going to do in the future. What we have done so far, so 701 megawatts of wind power plants for geothermal, 260 in hydroelectricity power plants, we reached 104. So we are over 1,000 megawatts in terms of the power plant installed capacity. If, for example, in 2010, they told me that, for example, we would reach to 1,000 megawatts 10 years ago, I wouldn't believe it. And during the opening ceremony at that time, someone approached, and I was together with my boss, and they asked me how many megawatts you will reach. I said 500. And the boss looked at me in the eyes, how possible? And now it is 1,000 megawatts that we have reached in a decade. Of course, we didn't do it alone. We did it together with our minister, with our deputy minister, with all the bureaucrats at the Energy Market Regulatory Authority. Without that support, not possible for us to do this. But we need more of this support, which I will mention in my later presentation, because the 1,000 megawatts that now we have, we've received our licenses and we've done a lot, it's okay. But now between 2020 and 2030, we still have the same enthusiasm, but our licenses are not at the desired level, which I will show you in my presentation. Because if you have a license, it doesn't mean that you can right away start establishing or installing your power plant. You need to get a lot of permits from the Ministry of Environment and so on. You have to spend 24 months minimum so as to get the license and make it real. Because as you all know, our main goal in here, our main goal is to reduce dependence abroad in energy supply and at the same time for carbon neutrality and to have zero emission. It's okay. We will do everything all together. And it's not only the Turkish Republic, but us, the private industry. We have to act swiftly. It is in the last 15 years that we have done the best in our investments. Now, as Gürüş Holding is one of the leading energy investor in the world, and I'm always telling my guests, you have my entire library. In geothermal, for example, initially, Mr. Minister, maybe you would remember at that time, there was even no regulation about geothermal power plants. I visited Hilmi Güler at that time and said how many megawatts we have reached in a geothermal power plant. And then in 5 minutes, I talked to him and said, it's okay, I told you, and just go to the general manager. I've just given the instructions. And then said, just make a draft law according to what he's saying. And together with Hilmi Güler, we have started the geothermal power plant. Then in the wind power plant, Taner Yıldız supported us a lot, always helped us in all the problems where he always gave me appointment and welcomed me. And Fatih,
sorunun var mı derdi.
Always ask me during the meetings, do you have a problem, for example? And then I was telling him I couldn't find a solution to this problem. And then together with the general manager, he sent me the general manager and we discussed together. And therefore each and every bureaucrat working in the government worked in the best way possible. So Turkey will have 1 megawatt more of generation. And I think the biggest difference that we make is that design engineering. Why it's important? Because in all our power plants, we did the design work together with Turkish engineers. This is also the task of introducing the Turkish engineers to the rest of the world. Why I'm saying this? While we're doing our investment, for example, we get proposals from multiple companies. Why a Turkish company would not, I mean, I was thinking at the time, why a Turkish company wouldn't do the design and the turbine. A couple of months ago, our colleagues from Aselsan came to visit us and said, can you share your know-how with us? I said, of course, I will get it as an instruction. Why? Because you will have some good turbine alternatives for Turkey. Of course, I will share. And same for geothermal power plants. In geothermal power plants, again, it is 1,600 over megawatts of a capacity. But as we cannot give the necessary engineering works for the power plants, the capacity is only 56%, but it is 99% with the power plants of Gürüş. In doing all, what my kind request from Mr. Minister is that, as Turkish President stated, during the game, if you change the rules of the game, as we get the financing from abroad, all our cash flows are negative. Therefore, once we get our license, whatever the laws are prescribing, that's how we give our information to the creditor. We take the money and do the investment. In case there is any difference, modification to the law in between that period, I cannot explain it to my creditor. What I'm trying to tell is that some penalties coming from the electricity market transmission company, PH, and quite huge penalties. And they are saying that this is the penalty imposed on you, so you have to pay it out of pocket. That's what the creditors are saying. As we are going to use the same financiers also in the future, it will be the same problem in the future. Our main point in here is that, as you know, our payback time is 15 years. So whatever is in the beginning should be applicable also at the end. And therefore, additional financial burden on the investors making everything uncertain. For example, some of the fee increases, like state hydraulic works, penalties, and so on, it makes us down. We need to be motivational. Therefore, these types of de facto situations should be over. Or near yekten prices at the same time, not so applicable for investment. For example, in geothermal in particular, I would say, of course, I know it myself because I'm doing all the design. And I make the best of the difference between the income and the expense. I myself established so many power plants, and because of the increase in the raw material prices all around the world, also in the input prices for turbine and all, there's a huge price difference. And therefore, the formula within the yekten mechanism is again due to an escalation. And because of the excessive increase in the currency, there is even no project applying for yekten. We thought to ourselves that we can continue with the geothermal, but no, our yekten expense cannot cover for the income. So I think there is the need for a new yekten mechanism that would be favorable favorable for all parties, which will have a positive contribution to the industry. 10,000 megawatts. If we make it, then we'll make an additional 10,000 megawatts until 2030. I'm sure there are several other problematic issues like redundant capacity, about their inclusion in the license. You already know about this. Therefore, it is really very important that we take a decision all together as a family, so we'll make good investments in the future if we do so. So, Idris, he passed away. Hope he died this year, so hope he rests in peace. And while delivering a presentation to Taner Yıldız, that is actually the meter of the well that you drill. And here, if you allow me, I would like to calculate the blade length, 42 kilometers in total. I mean, we built 42 kilometers of blade length. Maybe it's just a positive energy for you, and maybe you will have a different way of thinking. But in geothermal, 80 kilometers of pipeline installation, and also 1.34 billion cubic meters of natural gas import reduced thanks to all the projects that we have. Almost 20 kilometers of the tower height of the wind turbines, if you pile them up. And 51 acceptance completed. Why I'm saying 51 acceptance completed? Because, for example, in the past, I always did my power plants for, in particular, the provisional acceptance, and I traveled a lot. And a couple of times a year. If you ask me how many acceptances I went this year, just 2, and total 30 megawatts. And provisional acceptance of 30 megawatts of power plant only. What I'm trying to say is that there is actually a slowdown of the investments of the major companies in the industry. Speeding this up would not be good for the industry, and at the same time, I think it is our responsibility to mention about this, because whether you're asking me, do you have any investment project in your next year's budget? No, because we have the license, but as we all know, after licensing, it takes 5 to 6 years to start it. As content, I will continue to talk as long as the minister allows me. What we can do new projects. Within 10 years, I mean, we have to discuss about the new projects within the upcoming decade, because we have to do the planning for 10 years. As the CEO of Gürüş Holding, I cannot do this. I mean, I can do it in the international projects, but I have no idea at the national level. Once you said YEKA project, for example, there is an upper limit, but there is no lower limit. Without lower limit, for example, I can make a good calculation at YEKA projects, in particular. And once I put the negative contribution of the financing, then Gürüş cannot get any YEKA project. Why? Because we consider each project on its own. Gürüş is alone. We have our own equity. You don't have a foreign partner. So once you said there is no lower limit, then there are projects that are not feasible. And 1,000 megawatt of a project, the YEKA project, is there, staying still. 1,000 megawatt project, if terminated, then it means that this industry cannot make any investment, probably with 4 investors, 250 megawatts for each, which will be completed soon. Therefore, I think the feasibility of the project should also be considered by the Turkish bureaucrats, because we also have to provide them with the cash flow. So unfeasible projects, if you give them in the future to the incompetent companies, if you award them so, then the projects will not continue. So we need some new projects, and doing so, at the same time, we will have to check the procedures in YECA 1 and YECA 2, 2017 and 19 respectively. For example, I cannot predict for any turbine to be physically installed out of these projects until the end of 2023. For example, myself, physically present while erecting the towers. And at the same time, it takes 5 to 7 years for one, again, for example, project to start physical generation after the license, even if it is a YECA. And therefore, it probably will be 20, 30 or later for some of the projects, for example, that received license. And at the same time, as in particular the prices are interpreted in a different manner, in the new YECA projects, if we abide by these rules, at least the Turkish government actually will have more high quality projects. As for the new projects, as British, we cannot find any project to invest. If any, we actually have the capability to make the investment, and we also have the team. So we check abroad, and we have 460 megawatt onshore, 135 megawatt offshore capacity at the international level. So we are now trying to develop the project for 600 megawatt. Think about it. I cannot actually invest in my home country, but I invest abroad. It's okay, you make money, but it is sad because the best investment is the investment to Turkey. My founder always told me so. And that's the reason what I'm telling to the Mr. Ministers that give us new opportunities for new investments. It is the financial crisis, the pandemic crisis, and so on. But we are ready to strive the best. What is important is that we need a project so we can actually create new values. Why I ask for this? Because in renewable energy, the support is through state policy, which allows for the private sector to have more employment opportunities, as Ms. President also stated. And there are so many companies who are investing in Turkey and manufacturing in Turkey and exporting. As you all know, there will be employment opportunities in the power plants. It will help to reduce the current deficit, and our government at the same time will pay for less unemployment salary. So we are the driving force, and we are ready to run. As for the offshore projects, this is actually in the worldwide agenda, but it is actually going to be newly introduced in Turkey, the offshore projects. But I think we need time for the planning. Both we can make at the national and international level, we can work on this. So I believe it's not only onshore projects, of course, 100,000 megawatt, even if it's reached there. Also offshore, we have so many alternatives offshore. So I believe, so we also need some good engineering work for the offshore project. So, both as a company, as a stakeholder in the energy, and as the Turkish Wind Energy Association, what we should do, it is really very important to extend the life cycle of the projects and to make refurbishing and reinforcement should be performed, and that's what we're also working on. For other than licensing, also we have the opportunity to invest on our own projects. For example, in the very first power plant by Keskiner, I think it's been returned to the state or soon, I suppose. So besides new licensing, it's also important to decide on what we are going to do for the already operational ones. Actually, I have so many slides, so maybe I can share it with those who are interested in later. Now, of course, it is not good to ask for something each time during the conferences, but our government really supports us a lot for the hybrid power plants. For example, our Kocatepe wind power plant is doing good during winter, but not good during the summer. But I actually have the chance to have a hybrid power plant with the support of the government, and it's solar and wind now combined. And we have, thanks to the licenses given by our government to us, we actually maximize the electricity generation there. And therefore, I think there is only one thing I would like to mention in here is that, for example, they have a license of 80 megawatts, but 60 megawatts of solar power plant that they are doing, because 60 megawatts is not the wind power. So what I'm trying to say is that the engineering factor should be considered, and you have to use your engineering skills to understand how you can maximize your wind power plant, and then how you can complement it with the solar. This is not about excessive capacity. What is important is to get the best energy efficiency with the capacity that you already have in hand. Therefore, with regards to hybrid power plant, it's not about installing and erecting the power panels and then expect for generation. You have to maximize the energy efficiency there. Storage issue, I'm sure all our colleagues know about this. In storage, there will be less cost in 2023. I guess we'll get better costs for this, but we should not be away from engineering. And therefore, how we can make these power plants more operational, more active. I think we discussed during lunch with Ahmet, this is about digitalization, but don't worry, it's a long topic. I won't get into details about this, but especially our investors should be somehow involved in the digitalization, and we have to adapt to the modern world. And my advice is that focus on digitalization for your future investments. Thank you very much.
Son olarak da ilk turun
Well,
son...
last but not least, Mr. Demirer will be taking the floor. He is an expert in the fields because they are already the founders of the first wind plant. Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, all my respect to you. It's been many valuable speakers, and I only can echo what they had to say. It was like 25 years ago that we first started, and when we first checked, we discovered that it's really useful. It's not polluting the environment, and it was found to be feasible. And the third thing is, at the technical level, it was doable, and we really got into the business since we have checked all the boxes of the convenience list, and we paved the way. Actually, we were asked to conclude an agreement with the fuel suppliers. At the first time we reached out to the ministry, it was no bank to furnish any loans to us. The first plant was for only the consumption of our own factory, auto producer factory, and then Bozcaada was build, operate, transfer, and we built it, transferred it, and the EYAŞ is also good about it. I think they really have made a lot of profit. BOTs became permanent, and as it was the case, we waited for the first YEKDEM. The first YEKDEM was under the market price. Actually, the wholesale average price was taken as the basis, so it was like 1 year inflation rate under, but the bankers didn't like it. It they wanted to have a fixed foreign currency, linked currency. Actually, once we achieved that, things facilitated. But as Yektem was under market prices and market was above Yektem, we've taken Yektem as the guarantee and could find loans in favorable interest rates. In the years to follow, as the market prices lowered, things started to function. This is really the way that the importance of the investments started showing. So I hear it from people at the banks. Renewable energy investments are the least problematic investments, and renewables, no problems they're encountering. So Yektem, I think, has to be considered as a big chance, a big support. In terms of the prospects, Turkey is a growing country with increasing energy needs. Fossil fuels, we are not satisfied with the electricity generated with fossil fuels, and renewables now are becoming the pupil of the eye. I have to say that Germany is half our size, but they are beyond 50 gigawatts. And now we're surrounded with seas. We have favorable wind, favorable conditions. So I think the prospects is good in the long term. In the short term, Yektem is going to push us a bit because, you know, the foreign currency rates. Actually, the market prices were low at the time of fixing the prices. If you would look at the prices now, it wouldn't be that low. Currently, it's quite low. And now, in the short run, we cannot find any feasible projects. Now, one foot is inside the house, and the other is again outside. I'm sure, and we believe that the investment will slow down. It's a pity because we've reached a very good level in local production. Blades, towers are all manufactured in Turkey, but they take sustainability. It should be continuous. It shouldn't necessarily be Turkish markets always, but exports is a very important gate. But if the market in Turkey fluctuates, I think production will have some gaps as we have the wind beneath our wings. I think we need to go as fast as we can to find solutions for funding, for finances. What can that be? We'll turn faces, I mean, to Abdullah Bey and his team. But it's going to be a pity because we've reached such a good level. 1,500 megawatts can now be installed in our capacity every year. So both in terms of investors and the logistic providers, I think we shouldn't lose speed and go in our way. As I say, in the wind, we are not very optimistic about new investments with the existing conditions. But we need something to increase efficiency. At the same connection point, we put wind next to solar. They have very low interference. Sun and wind do not interfere very much. Therefore, both we can use the same connectivity and we have more efficiency. Plus, the energy is fluctuating less in average, which pushes the network, the grid less. In wind and solar, we can go, I think, a bit more. Electric cars, I think, these vehicles will increase in Turkey quite a lot soon. And the cheap evening energy will be used to connect our vehicles to connection grid, and we can have about 100 kilowatt per hour battery capacity. And if this is 1 million vehicles, 100 gigawatt hour capacity will be achieved. I think this is a lot better than the need, of course, to balance it off with fossil fuels. With the cars, of course, the battery technologies will become cheaper and will develop further. Just to make a calculation, every 2 years there is a development in the battery technology. So it will get cheaper in time and will be efficiently used for the vehicles. Generating electricity by winds, we will reduce natural gas. And if we generate electricity for vehicles, this time we will need less fossil fuels. So my prospects for the future is quite bright, hopefully not to be very expensive. Thank you. Thank you very much for this contribution, and we're at the end of the first round. The panelists have brought up some issues in the first round, which I would like to reiterate, maybe to clarify a bit before moving on to the next round. Actually, the speakers were quite right in the points they have raised. Investors are looking for more capacity opportunities, which I have to say, in particular for wind panels and wind plants, permit processes are quite lengthy before construction phase. Therefore, once you announce the capacity, it will have taken quite a long time already. And it's really an important consideration for the investors. Of course, according to the current mode of calculation, we need to consider how we can make use of the existing capacity and how fast we can turn everything into investment. And critically speaking, for the fastest capacity increase, we are considering all modes of investment. And our efforts are again for this point. But maybe going beyond that, we do think that the announced capacities are not sufficient as well. So we need to consider how the capacity can be enhanced further and how higher capacities can be achieved. The other day I was attending a conference somewhere else, and I told there as well, between the electrical connectivity and the wind solar, particularly for hybrids, we shouldn't convince, or we shouldn't also be confused of the two, because the amount of capacity we can use for wind is calculated differently than how much of a plant we can connect to the grid electrically. I mean, these two are quite distinct matters. This point is worth remembering. In Germany or in other countries that are located in the heart of Europe, they have a different way of calculation. In my opinion, they have more advantageous locations because they are sitting in the heart of a big grid. Therefore, that solar and wind energies and those fluctuations in these two modes of energies that we cannot control is affecting many countries. And if you are sitting in the center of Europe, you can manage these problems in an easier fashion. But Turkey is positioned to the very end of Europe. Therefore, we have limited connectivity in Europe, where we cannot get connected to many spots in Europe. I think one of the biggest limitations for wind and solar is that the transmission grid is not controlled or is not managed quite well. Currently, there is a way to make a calculation, and we cannot say that the capacity should be as such and such in this point, but we have 12 areas in Turkey where we have different capacities and a breakdown of the capacity according to areas is clarified, and as a capacity we can disclose only to a certain extent. But I think this needs, the methodology needs revisiting. I mean, just to check if it works properly, whether we can be more flexible. And this is what TEİAŞ has been doing. I cannot give you a deadline now, but I'm sure that soon, in a very short period of time, they will be completing this work to look into how the capacity can be improved. And the ministry has been doing its best to this end. And these have been the items, the issues raised out by the speakers as well. We must raise our capacity. And of course, in the past, we were doing auctions, and there were some gaps or mistakes, so to speak, in the past. Deriving lessons from these mistakes, I think, will shed light to the future of the sector. And the sector has been always to the point that there must be a starting point, I mean, a base price, and otherwise some problems are to be faced. Actually, it was supposed to be yesterday, this month, but there were many weaknesses. Therefore, we thought that it wouldn't be the healthy environment to get the bids, and we postponed. And hopefully, as far as I know, in April, we will be getting the applications, hoping to overcome these problems, these undefinite points. But the sector should always be there to consider. Otherwise, the banks and the credit institutions are considering all these aspects as a problem. Our DG will be defining the conditions, of course, of this auction or the bidding process. I told Murat Bey just to share with the industrial representatives details about how it will be functioning. Despite of the sector, I mean, despite of the points raised by the sector, we shouldn't do things, and we should reach an agreement with the sector always. And when the sector agrees, okay, this fashion of running business is going to be the right way to go, because as a result of the tendering process, we can just proceed with investments. And we will be getting in contact with the Turkish Wind Energy Association in the days to come. No, it's tomorrow. Oh, is the tomorrow's meeting. For that purpose, our expectation from the sector is not only for the wind but also for the solar. The opinions of the sector are respected, since it's going to be you to make the investment. We are only the regulatory authority who will be in charge of laying the rules. So within the framework of your opinions, we need to reach an agreement as to how the process can be completed in a sound way. Many ways were tried. I mean, since I was at the EPDK, there were many procedures, many methods tried. Sometimes one method proves itself, but in the next step, it would fail. So we need try-ins for the suitability of the methods. So yesterday at the meeting, please feel free to disclose yourself so that we will get a good functioning at the end of the process. Okay, after having emphasized my points, I'd like to move on to the second round. But we'll have more limited time during the second round, not only for the panelists, but also for the rest of the audience. And if any of the panelists would like to get involved, and provided that they keep the second round shorter, I will turn to the panel. Do we have any time limitation? Okay, then I will turn to Mr. Enis for the next round.
Thank you very much, distinguished minister. Actually, for the wind industry to be successful in the future, we have already stated two important things. It all starts with capacity. Having less capacity limitation, and on the other hand, capacity increase is important. We know about our wind basins, but we cannot actually explain the capacity at certain basins because of certain limitations. There's need for additional growth. It all started with that. And then with the experience that we get with regards to auctions about capacity allocation, as I told you at the beginning of my talk, this also would shed a light upon the future. 10,580 megawatts, majority of those completed during the previous YACTEM or financed accordingly with favorable macro and microeconomic conditions. These are such capacities. We as the investors here, but maybe there is a need for a couple of extra seats in here. We have other partners, financiers, the banks, and they are those who identify the rhythm, the feasibility, bankability of the project. And looking at the current auction conditions, unfortunately not possible to have a reasonable financing, and the banks are very frankly expressing it at different platforms. So there is the need to make some changes in the rules of the auction, and your news are actually so promising, and there will be a meeting soon. And we have, as the General Director of Energy Works mentioned, we actually have a DAO on the table, but if we shape it well together with the stakeholders, everything would be positive. I mean, we're hopeful, promising. As for the auctions, just to go through a couple of this, I mean, and in particular, those that you mentioned, in the auctions, first, the expectation of the investor is predictability. I mean, of course, there is a short actual timeline, but also a longer one required. And as Mr. Minister, you mentioned it so well, just like there is actually a ceiling price, also the need for a base price. I mean, both for us as the investors and for their cash flow tables to be more clear, and sharing of risk is so important, it should be predictable. And the currency of the auction is another topic. If possible, it must be foreign currency. And or at least, for example, the TL, Turkish lira, would be lower than the foreign currency. At the same time, qualification criteria, both technical and financial, especially work completion, or during the permits and licenses. Okay, some of the documents are taken in advance, but documents and presentation of the documents will ensure for more sustainable future, or at least it will indicate the feasibility of the future auctions, because the goal of the auction is actually to provide for the best offer to the user, but at the same time, it must be feasible and rational. And this, in my opinion, is also an important part. Another topic is that, especially, as you all know, the megawatt base, for example, in 12 months, for example, co-payment, the auctions can be completed with co-payments for 12 months, for example, is an important topic. About the financing side, now, both there is the Paris Agreement is now ratified, and now in Glasgow we have the 2023 goal, our works in compliance with the Green Deal, and so, and especially over the international financial institutions, we should be able to have access to credits as the industry, and therefore this is a responsibility also assumed by the state. So this is another heading. Other than this, it's always say auctions and license during the panel, but also in the out of license part, since last summer with the declaration of the Green Deal and after the carbon tax at border, because in the industries that there will be carbon tax like iron and steel, fertilizer, glass, and these types of industries. Even for some of the international companies in their for 2023 and later, they actually should know about their timetables for 2023. Also, in terms of electricity generation, in terms of decarbonization, they are doing so many planning. Of course, it would be a couple of megawatts or can even go up to 100 megawatts, depending on the size of the facility. This is also another field. And therefore, it's now also possible to work on this. I think this also would be a good option for the wind industry. I don't know, land allocation and other issues, there will be too many issues, but just like in the license part, we did it all together, it also would be the same. I mean, it's not just a couple of or a bunch of turbines. We're speaking about high volume power plants also could be the case. About carbon pricing, I would like to say a couple of words. Now, both the green, within the framework of the Green Deal and within the framework of the 23 target, and especially emission trading, I think this will increase the interest on renewable energy. What do I mean by this? For example, thermal power plants. There will be a carbon tax or additional carbon tax to be imposed on them. Therefore, their marginal costs will be higher. Therefore, the renewable energy in the spot market would be much more attractive. As for their generation, of course, in the next step, there will be a relative increase in the electricity prices, which also will trigger energy efficiency. At the same time, the consumers will start taking actions, but at least at the spot market, we actually will have the chance to have a stronger pricing. About new business areas, distinguished speakers already mentioned, just some headlines, a couple of those that I will mention, and then I will wrap up. Hybrid power plants, it's, I think, right the time that the industry requires a renewable output, quite a timely regulation for the wind industry, as you mentioned it so well. Especially, there was actually confusion about the confusion, but we know it closely, especially the solar and the wind power. This hybrid approach is so important for the future of the industry, especially for those power plants under YEKDEM. It's so important. And there is a huge demand on this, and the demand all improved shortly. And so now we have the administrative process. And of course, there also will be some of the missing parts of the chain, but it will be wind, sun, wind, solar, and storage. That's a triple effect. For storage, for the time being, it's not at an investable price level yet. According to some analysis, 2024, 2025, maybe it will be earlier, we don't know, but this is about the price issue, a price decrease. And the second thing is that from technological perspective, there will be some new developments, especially for the use of cycle of use. And the other thing is that it is a source that could be feasible, not only on arbitrage or individual, but if we can have a diverse approach and all, then we'll get maximum benefit out of it. So there, I guess, will be the need for some others. Renewable supply contracts, again, especially for the power plants out of YEKDEM, it is promising for the future. Of course, predictability is an overall problem for the market. As I told you in the out of license part,
dijitalleşmeden bahsediyoruz.
Digitalization that you mentioned about data in general, both for operation and maintenance and all. At the same time, sales and trade part is important in digitalization, and I believe we are all acting separately. The last thing is the average age of the turbines. If I'm not mistaken, it is 6-7. I'm speaking about the wind turbine fleet of Turkey, relatively young, but time passes by. There will be aging of the equipment and machinery, so there will be need for other requirements. In the mature markets, 20 years that they set for the commercial life, 25 goes up to 30. Therefore, life expectancy increase with the reinforcement performed. So there is also a major business opportunity in here. As for the offshore power plants, it's also the middle and the long-term area with new business field for us. Again, in the medium and long run, I would like to say is that green is hydrogen. We started to use it more. This is always the case. We first start with the conceptual discussion, then move further. As for the power plants out of YEKDEM or at the same time the other power plants that are generating at different prices, they can produce hydrogen, and having a green hydrogen at the same time is an opportunity in the medium run. And there is no high quantity hydrogen production, but 98% by the fossil fuels. This also will change. I mean, in the middle and the long run, it will be an opportunity for us. So our future is actually not dark at all. We have drawn a lot of lessons, and we are shoulder to shoulder together with our stakeholders. So it's a successful industry. I'm not pessimistic at all. I'm so promising. So that's the end of my words. Thank you very much.
de doldurduk ama çok kısa ilave
Although
edecek.
we've consumed our scheduled time, I think we can just give just a few moments to the rest of the panelists. Actually, Enis has already provided comprehensive information, but after the pandemic and the global supply chain, there has been a great change. Electrification and the need for electricity is quite high. This year, we're experiencing the first effects. But I think the next, maybe the fundamental problem to face is about the emission trading system. By 2025, in the very intensive industries, there will be a burden, an extra burden, and that extra burden will not be about an external financing and rather will be met from internal resources. I think it's going to be very important to meet the demand. So the resource that will be met externally can indeed be used for funding our own projects. Ministry of Trade and Energy, if only they can collaborate as the wind energy producers, I think we can have an added value created there. The second point I'd like to highlight is, as you know well, technology is evolving every other day. As wind plants, since the very beginning, which by the way, we have turbines which are 12, 13 years old, and they're getting aged quite well. So by supporting them with new technologies, we can have a higher level production. But with the technology of the past, economic ways were sought, so we need some economic ways of maintaining them as well. So there is the need for starting reinforcement of these plans. So we need some fast reaction, both in terms of permits and activation dates. the energy that we are losing from fossil fuels is now to be considered as an extra quarter climate burden. But emission tax or emission trade system will again be in the system to put one next to the other. So we must have a system or a structure that we are considering reinforcement as well. If you consider these extra costs, maybe it doesn't look very realistic, but the battery technologies may also emerge as a side service in hydroelectricity, even if there is a minor, fluctuation. By using the battery technologies, we can respond to the need faster. Actually, this will reduce the total cost of grid investments. So as the players of the sector, we can run through this with the line limitations and the fossil support or hydroelectricity support in the balance of system. I think we need to work together so as to put all these capacities together. So we need to work with TEIA rather than announcing capacities to us. We need to go there onto the line physically just to check what kind of added value we can create together, and we're in for it. Since already emphasized, I will not be speaking about the tender system, about the unbalanced system management. Hydrogen can also be used as a storage system, just not the need of the industry, but at the same time, in our plants that have a proximity to the natural gas resources, hydrogen partially, and as you know, the calorific value is higher than natural gas. So periodically, we can inject it into the grid so as to avoid unbalances. So I think we have the chance of making use of hydrogen at this point. Lastly, about the financing, we have installed capacity since we are getting into the 13th or the 14th year. Therefore, once we have the capacity, not only on YETA, but only on the green papers, we can prove ourselves. Therefore, the equity financing can be used to provide more security. Therefore, we can use the gaps of the fossil fuels to compensate for that, because in terms of availability, one has between 60 to 80 hours, has at the level of 40s. Therefore, we need to compensate for it with a higher speed. In this respect, we should have availability of rapid financial resources, and together with the support of the European Union to the transformation, IFI or ECFA-based credits can be used to also implement a lending level. By the way, we are ready, provided that we are assigned with the capacity. Thank you. Ali, would you have anything to add? I just have a question to you, Mr. Deputy Minister. Before Idris Bey passed away, he just asked me to work on something for 2 months. And he wanted to see what would happen 50 years later, and our licenses are for 49 years. And he said, your license is for 49 years. What is your turbine expected life? 20.5. So what happens in the next 20, 24 years? I cannot see it. You cannot see it. Maybe your grandchildren. 49 years later, will you be BOT? Will you be transferring to the government? And how? What is the rule? Is there a legislation behind it? And I looked into it. I couldn't find a legislation. So the reason I'm asking you the question is, when renovating the systems, maybe there will be the need for extra modernization to have a better turbine selection. Will it be possible to extend the life of the turbines if we work on it together? Then maybe if we can see what happens 45 to 50 years in time. And our company is 64 years old, and we can still use the cranes purchased initially by Idris Bey. So in our own wind turbines, we have maintenance technicians and engineers who are working up there. Therefore, we are a company who thinks to be good at maintenance, but how to organize this process? And there is no answer to this question because there is no legislation behind it. Anybody who would, actually, there are some interpretations of the legislation by the lawyers. And of course, we have to discuss whose interpretation would supersede, but there are answers to it, but we don't know if it's the right answer, question mark. So I cannot find an answer to this question, and I will not be able to react to your question. It's still debatable as an answer, maybe controversial. So I think we need to dwell on it, and then we will be better in seeing answers to that. There is one thing I'd like to draw the attention of the industry. As you know, gold standards and USG standards in wind and solar are assigned for green standards and certificates. They didn't serve for a purpose 2 years ago, but it's now starting to work. Now, fitting with the carbon footprint, Asiçelik, Göktaş, Parsan companies, our company is working in the iron and steel industry, all are supplied with green energy so that there will be no problem in the years to come for exports, because iron and steel industry should be used to facilitate and accelerate our exports. Otherwise, there will be new taxes to face. Since the certifications are provided from abroad, there are some hindrances about the new plants certification. I think certification should not be ignored. Any additional remark? 2 points I'd like to share with you. As a continuum of Arkan, I have to say that with the new YEKDEM, financing is quite a big challenge. But once the plant already completes its payments, it is really not easy to make 50 from zero, but it will be easier to fund it with the power of 50 if it's only 100. So capacity increase. I think capacity increase is really important. We need energy because we have a high growing capacity. And I think we need all these aspects to gain power. Therefore, we are trying to provide capacity there. Actually, once the companies win the tender, it's really been bothering me when they are blocking the system. And sometimes we are not able to get the permits timely, and maybe the permits must be finished in 2 years, and then as of today you have 12 years, and if you finish in 1 year you will buy 11 years, and if it's 3 years you finish you will get 9 years. But there is a similar approach to it. But in tomorrow's meeting, hopefully, all the stakeholders of the sector will come up with their expectations, and this will also be mentioned. So an announcement to the industry. If there is some point that needs to be voiced out by the association, I think you should let the TWEA know about it so that they can discuss it over tomorrow's meeting. I would like to thank all the participant speakers for these 2 rounds, and would like to spare some time for the Q&A, if we may, and then we will complete the session. And in the meanwhile, the floor is open to questions from our online participants as well, and would like to start from our audience here. Hello, Mehmet Kıvanç. I have a suggestion about the tendering process. 600 megawatts of solar energy tender requires YEKA-2 during the YEKA-2 tender, and most of it were just applied. And the same, can we consider per megawatt of, let's say this much of contribution you will have to pay. and let's say for 3 months and make a limitation. I mean, in addition to what Erol Bey said, once the investor pays for the money, they will really have to get the permits quite quickly and make the investments quickly so as to get the money back. In practice, that is how it works, but we are told that there will be some drawbacks to it because the financial resources to be used for investment will now be kept as a source for this future, budget. According to the current conditions of the auction, it seems quite a big challenge to put it in practice. But once we go to the bank, I mean, what should be the down level? And I think we need to discuss it with the bank properly. There is a solution in our mindset to find a solution to it, and tomorrow we'll discuss about it. And as you say, I mean, the part that you are saying, your comment is not an option, but we have to stay within the limits of the law. I mean, it's not possible for the moment to do that within the limits of the law. But I think the base price is the mostly uttered solution, which can be sorted out, and we'll see.
And about the letter of guarantee, per megawatt, if I'm not mistaken, 10,000 Turkish liras. That is what is asked by the Energy Market Regulatory Authority. That is the fee asked by the authority. But this letter of guarantee quantities, if increased a little bit more the amounts, I mean, especially for the investors, because as you're saying, cash, I'm not speaking about cash, I'm speaking about the letter of guarantee. Yes, we can increase the letter of guarantee as well. I mean, we just consult, so as to find the optimum. If you increase too much, it will not be possible for all. Then there will be some claims that this is actually against the competition, or maybe you determined so high. I mean, it's not only the base price. I think the association, I mean, it's not only about, as for the tomorrow's meeting, it's not only about base pricing. Also, it would be nice if you, offer us some recommendations and we can decide all together. Each type of specification has its own pluses and minuses, pros and cons. Competition is a nice thing, of course, but there are 50, for example, posts that they erect, and all the applications and so far, but it is not feasible. Eventually, it's not feasible. I mean, how we are going to tell to someone who joined the auction saying that what you're saying is you cannot do it? I mean, if I tell it to you, would you accept it? Because the most important thing in here is actually to properly identify the rules of the game. There will be an auction, but it must be a proper one. And at the same time, the capacities will turn into investment. And therefore, we just always we will consider anything positive. Any further question from the audience? If not, let me just check the questions online. The 2000 megawatt of YEKA WPP, the purchasing guarantee unit price, whether do you plan to revise it according to the current situation? Yes, of course, we do consider revising it. I mean, once everything is much more predictable, we will redefine it. I mean, it is beyond changing the rules of the auction, of course. At the same time, this price would be at a level that will be feasible. I mean, it must be feasible for the investor. Yes, of course, we will revise it. Burakcan Akyol, send a question to all the panelists. In 2021, and
TL olarak %80, dolar olarak
TPT increased by 50% over US dollar in 2022. Do you think that the price increases will continue? What do you think the revised selling price will continue for how long? And for 2022, whether to join YEKDEM or not, did you have any hesitation? That's the question. Is there anyone who would like to reply? Did you join the YEKDEM? Are you reluctant to join, or even if you join the auctions, are you reluctant?
YEKDEM kısmıyla başlayayım.
Let me start with the YEKDEM
Dolar
part.
bazındaki fiyat artışı.
Of course, the price increase over US dollar. Yes, we had a review on this, try to identify the risk, but from here to 2022, in the electricity industry, same for the other industries, there is a trend. The commodity prices will start to decline at a certain term, especially looking at the term markets like the oil, natural gas, coal, I mean, the commodity prices that are at our interest. A decrease is expected next year, but of course, relatively there will be a price increase. But in the medium term, there will actually be a decline and a recovery. That is the general perspective. And each and every company, they have their own price model with regards to supply and demand. All components are taken into account altogether, and a price is predicted, and decide rationally whether it is good to stay at YEKDEM. We are still at YEKDEM. We did not want to take the risk. Another question directed to you. Green hydrogen is really will save the planet in terms of energy. I mean, there is 2030 target before 2050. That is 55% of greenhouse gas reduction. For now, for hydrogen and energy storage, despite technological and cost-related problems, do you think it is possible to reach the target? Why? Because there's no alternative to fossil fuels other than those that we have in hand for the time being. And the other thing is, what is your approach to offshore WPP? In Turkey, we are not a North Sea, but how do you think, what do you think is about the efficiency, about the cost? Do you think it also would pave the way for green hydrogen? Thank you for the question. Interrelated questions, by the way. Let me start with the hydrogen part. Now, the hydrogen as the fuel of the future, yes, can be considered from different perspectives. I mean, in different, for example, industrial units, it will replace fossil fuel, like heavy industry or iron and steel. There will be a transformation into hydrogen, in my opinion, and therefore this entire green transformation, that is the again fit for 5. So there are some ambitious predictions there. Whether we will reach these goals or not, Europe has been allocated high amount funds for this in Germany and elsewhere. But this, I would say, is an overall industry-based transformation. I mean, heavy industry and oil, natural gas, and there are several other interconnected issues. But as for fossil fuels, I mean, natural gas, for example, I mean, in my opinion, it's hydrogen that will replace fossil fuel, in particular green hydrogen production will be the result for this. As for offshore, there are pilot projects to be commissioned soon for offshore power plants. And also there's some electrical units, and the hydrogen is supplied. So it's actually a topic on its own, not only about the onshore. Also will probably speed up the offshore process as well.
kapasitesi.
For Turkey's offshore capacity,
Kısaca bahsetmiştim. En son Dünya
I
Bankası'nın
told you
yatırım
briefly a recent study by the World Bank about the technical potential. If I'm not mistaken, 12 gigawatt of fixed offshore capacity. I mean 63 gigawatt of floating turbines, that is offshore capacity, and therefore 75 gigawatt of technical capacity. But from feasibility perspective, offshore, I would say, has some disciplines other than onshore. I mean, from wind measurement to aquatic life. I mean, too many other disciplines are required for this, and therefore, feasibility of the technical capacity, there is some criteria, such continental shelf at the Aegean Sea, and everything must be very well analyzed. And there is a huge potential at the onshore. Of course, we will come up with offshore soon, but a marriage with hydrogen, I guess, will pave the way for offshore in the middle run. Thank you. Hybrid is another discussion. And about incentives for hybrid projects, will there be a YEKDEM project for this? I mean, about whichever the price is lower from the main or the supplementary source under YEKDEM, that would be used. I mean, if, for example, there is still time for YEKDEM for a primary source, then the hybrid, the energy produced from the hybrids will also be under the same scope. In capacity increases, will the same local content be kept? And this is important also for the subcontractors. Do you consider it? Yes, we do. That's the short answer, but I cannot very well understand the question. I mean, there are other things. What I mean is that there are different categories. Which one do you mean? I mean, I think there is a need for a detailed talk, or you have to ask the question more detail. So that's all for the upcoming questions from the audience. If no further question, then I would like to thank to the participants and then to the panelists once again, and hopefully this will actually bode good for the industry. And I would like to thank to the Executive Committee of the Turkish Wind Energy Association for organizing this event. Congratulations. We at the same time would like to thank to the Minister and the very distinguished panelists, and thank you very much all for your contribution and participation. In January 12th, as online, we will have financing of the new era in wind. Hope to see you back again in the next event.
Sayın Bakanımla bir fotoğraf almak
Now we
isteriz.
would like to have a family photo and with all the stakeholders and the Mr. Minister.
Evet. Siz de buyurun. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz.
Thank you very much.
Sizleri de alalım lütfen.